Welcome everyone. Today I'll be explaining to you about data science exploring data. Uh, let's start with what is data exploration. Data exploration is like when you first get a dataset and you're trying to figure out what you're looking for. Before building any fancy models or doing complex analysis, you first need to explore and understand your data first. The two main reasons we do this is because it helps us pick the right tools for later. Like you wouldn't use a certain tool or technique if their data look a certain way. And the second is that humans are really good at spotting patterns just by looking at stuff. So sometimes we're even better than algorithms. Moving on to techniques used in data exploration, there are three main techniques that we use for exploring data. First is summary statistics, which is using numbers like averages or median to describe your data. Second is visualization, which is like making graphs, charts, so you can actually see the data itself or what's going on. And the third is OLAP, which is more about how databases organize data for analysis. But we'll talk about that later. For this video, I'm mainly focused on the summary statistics and visualization, since those are the core concepts of the chapter. So moving on to mean and median, they both try to tell you what's typical or average in your dataset. Mean is just the regular average, so you add everything up and divide it by divide it. So you add everything up and divide it by how many numbers you have. But the problem with mean is that it's super sensitive to outliers, meaning extreme values gets messed up. For example, if you have 5 students who score 70, 75, 80, 85, and 90 on a test, the mean adds up to 80. Uh, but for but if one student somehow scores 500 on the test, the mean jumps to 150, which doesn't really represent anyone's actual score. And median is the middle value when you line everything up, so it doesn't really care about those crazy score. That's why median is way better if you have weird outliers in your dataset. Now for range and variance. While mean and median tells you the center, variance and range tell you how spread out your data is. Range is the simplest one. It's just the difference between the highest and lowest value of your dataset. While variance or standard deviation are more while variance and standard deviation are more sophisticated. So they measure how far a value is from the mean or the average. Like if you're looking at test scores, a small variance means that everyone scored pretty similar, but a large variance means everyone scores were like very much spread out. So some really high scores like 100 and some really low scores like 10 or 20, making the data very much more spread out. But just like with mean, variance is also sensitive to outliers, so sometimes we use other measures instead. On to visualization techniques. Histograms is probably the most basic and easiest one to understand. A histogram pretty much just shows the distribution of your data, basically where most of your values are. You divide the range into bins, and each bar shows how many data points fall into that bin. It's like organizing your closet by color. You can see that you have mostly black shirt or white, and maybe a little bit of yellow. Here's something important though. If you look at the histogram that's on the screen right now, the left one is 10 bin and the right one is 20 bins. Even though the data is exactly the same, the amount of bins you choose can change how the data appears and how it looks. So you have to experiment and find the right one. Now on to box plots. Box plots are just another way to visualize distribution, but they're more compact than histograms. The box itself shows where the middle 50% of your data lives, from the 25th percentile to the 75th percentile. The red line in the middle of the box is the median. The whiskers are those lines sticking out, showing the range of most of your data. And those red plus signs dot outside the box plot itself, those are outliers. So that means that those values are unusually high or low. What's cool about box plot is that you can compare multiple groups of data side by side really easily. Like in this iris example, you can compare sepal length, sepal width, pedal length, and pedal width all at once. And you can immediately see that the pedal length has way more variation than the sepal width. Scatter plots are probably the most popular visualization technique in data science. This is when each dot represents one data point. So like one flower, in the iris dataset. The position of the dots shows one dot shows two attributes at once, like petal length on the x-axis or petal width on the y-axis. The cool thing is that you can see relationships between variables very easily. If the dots form a line going up, that means as one variable is increased, the other also increases. So they are positively correlated. But if the dots are scattered everywhere with no pattern, then there's no relationship. You can see at the scatter plot array, it shows all possible combination of the four iris attributes. You can see that some pairs have clear pattern like petal length and petal width. They form a line with the dots. But some other pairs are more scattered, meaning they are not as related. Now moving on to something a bit more advanced, a parallel coordinates plot. We use this when we have a lot of variable, not just two or three, and each vertical line represents one variable like sepal length, sepal width, petal length, or petal width, and each colored line going across represents one flower. When lines are grouped together, it follows similar patterns. In this iris example, you see how the blue line from Setosa separates clearly from red and green? That tells us that Setosa flowers are very different from the other two species. So to wrap things up, that's data exploration in a nutshell. You use summary statistics like mean, median, variance to describe your data with numbers, and you visualize them with histograms, box plots, scatter plots to actually see the pattern itself. The whole point is to understand what you're working with before you jump into complex analysis or modeling. Throughout these examples, we use the iris dataset. It's a classic dataset with measurements of different flower species. It's a great example because it's simple enough to understand, but it shows all the concepts clearly. And that's it for Chapter 3 of Introduction to Data Science.